Hi guys, it's me, Miss Lorraine. I figured I would just put a few little art lessons up online for you so you'd have something to do while you're home. And you can do these by yourself or with your siblings or with your mom or dad. So I'm first going to show you the little setup that I put together here. It's really similar to what we have in the art room. I've got my easel with my canvas paper on there. And you can go to the store, you can order online if you have to, get some canvas or even canvas paper. This is actually, it's a pad of canvas paper, so it makes it kind of easy. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And what I did for a palette, this is actually just a little meat tray that you get your meat in. You can also use a paper plate or a piece of cardboard. I put a sheet of aluminum foil over it and I put my paint right on there. And then to keep it wet, you can just spray it once in a while. And then you recognize these little Glad plastic containers for the water. And for my brushes, I just use a little pitcher. I happened to make this one in a ceramics class a while ago, but you can use any kind of a cup to put your brushes in. And you don't need a lot of brushes. I'm going to do most of the lessons that I'm teaching just with 1 or 2 brushes. So that's something you can pick up, you know, at the store, Walmart or Job Lot or wherever happens to be open right now. And so I'm going to do a few little lessons for you, and hopefully you will get inspired. Hi everyone, today's lesson is going to be on painting clouds with acrylics. So I have my little palette here. I have my ultramarine blue and my white, and I'm going to mix a little bit of that ultramarine blue into the white, same as we do in class. I got my little color mixing chart here behind me, as you can see, and I can put that in the pictures section so you can download it for yourself. And that's what we're going to start out with first. We'll put down our sky blue and on our canvas paper, and then we're going to paint right over that. So here we go. We're putting down our ultramarine blue and white, which is our sky blue. And if you notice, I didn't mix it absolutely perfect, so we still have some streaks of the blue, some streaks of the white in there. And use a little bit of water. And I'm just going to keep on going back and forth because I want to set that nice sky color. So we're going to just put that all on here like this and fill this whole area with the sky color. And you can kind of see I sketched in some mountains very lightly because that's going to be what's on the landscape. So I'm doing this a lot faster than you'll probably want to do it, just because I want to kind of show you everything a little quicker and get that sky down there. So you want to probably take your time a little and not do it this crazy. But I just want to put this all down here so you can see the base that we're working on, which is going to be the sky, and our clouds are going to go over this. So we're just going to put on this sky blue, and I'm going to let that dry just a little bit, and then we're going to put our clouds on there. Now I put one little cloud on there over here just to show you what we're going to be doing. And so now I'm going to show you how we do it. This paint is not all the way dry, but it's pretty dry. So we're going to go over it with the white, and you'll notice that you just kind of dab it on there, and it's going to pull a little bit of that blue into the white. And that's what we want because we don't want the cloud to be absolutely perfectly white. So now we're just going to lightly brush the bottom of the cloud like this, and the same thing with the top of the cloud, just lightly brush it. Now we don't want a lot of paint on the brush all at once, so I'm just doing a little bit of paint on the brush. And now you can see I'm kind of mixing it. And you can take a plain brush with very little paint on it and just kind of dab the tops like this. And see how it makes it kind of fluffy like that. And that's going to be our first layer. And now we're going to do the second layer with a little more white. So here I'm going to take some more solid white, and I'm just doing little chunks of cloud. And if you notice the stroke, it's just a little kind of a puff like this. And I'm not filling in the whole thing, I'm just putting a few little puffs. And I'll go over the bottom one more time like this. And let me show you what you don't want to do. You don't want to take this big hunk of white like that. And if you do, what you can do is like a reverse painting. So now you're going to wipe off your paint onto a rag, and you just kind of pull a little bit of it off with your plain brush. And now you can take the paint that's left there and just kind of fluff it a little bit. Like this. And in between you can rinse your brush off, and now you have this nice clean brush, and you just kind of puff up a little bit like this. And you'll notice that you want to like fluff the edge of the cloud, because you don't want it to be a perfect solid cloud. You want it to be a little puffy on the edges and a little puffy on the bottom. And it's okay if you pull off a little bit of the paint so that the blue shows through, because that makes like little shadows in the clouds. So if you'll notice, you can kind of pull, like right here I did, a little bit of the moisture on the brush pulls it out a little bit. And now you're fluffing just a little bit. And now you see how that looks like a really nice cloud. So that's what you want to do for those types of clouds. You can also do wispy clouds, which is more like this. It's like, I like to call it the smile stroke, because it actually looks like you're doing a little smile. And this you're sort of fluffing, and you just keep on going until it gets to be a nice fluffy cloud. So you notice that. And now the other type of cloud is like a streaky cloud. So this you're kind of doing this on an angle, but you're also going to wipe off your brush a little bit and fluff that as well, because you don't want a solid hunk of white. You want it to look fluffy like a cloud. And the way you do that is just going over it with the plain brush, wiping it off every so often. And now you can see there's 3 different types of clouds. This is more of a streaky cloud. This is more of a fluffy, little like smile type cloud. And these are more the puffy clouds. And you can actually make these even more puffy by adding a 3rd layer. You can put a few little strokes of just some solid white in there. Not at the edge, but more toward the middle. And if you do get it too chunky, you can also just come back with the plain brush and fluff it again on the bottom, fluff it on the top. And there I got a little few extras. And if you notice, clouds will have a few little pieces coming off here and there. They're not always these perfect round puffs. So there you see the type of clouds. And you can try that. You can also do the same thing with oil paints, but we like to work in the acrylics. Much more fun, I think, and quicker. And I'm going to make another video as well showing you how to do it with some watercolors, if that's what you have. So this is your acrylic clouds, and happy trying that. Hi everybody, happy day. This is our lesson 2 for the landscape. We did the clouds last time, and this time we're going to do the mountains. So gather your supplies and let's get started. All right, here we are, our mountain lesson. So I'm going to start out, I put some of it down so you can see what it's going to look like. Now what I did was I mixed ultramarine blue, and I rinsed off my brush, and then go into my alizarin crimson, or just crimson or dark red, depending upon what your particular brand of paint calls it. I'm going to add a little bit of white. So here you see it became a little too red, so I'm going to add a tiny bit more blue. Now I think I've got just about the right color. So I'm going to pull a little bit aside here, and I'm going to add some white. And this is going to be the background mountains. And I think I need a tiny bit more of the blue in there. And so what you see back here, that's the background mountains. So we're going to put in maybe one right over here, because that gives you the idea of what you're doing for the background, which is sort of what they call atmospheric perspective, which means that when you see things farther and farther back, they get lighter and lighter and closer to the color of the sky. So that's what that is. And now we're going to go into the mountain itself. And so I did a little more purple than I actually want. So I'm going to add a little bit more white, a little bit more of the blue, and it's probably a little closer. And maybe a little more blue. Some of these things you have to kind of adjust it as you go if you don't quite mix enough. And I didn't quite mix enough paint, so now I'm going back and getting a little more. So now we have this background mountain here. And I'm going to just sort of paint that color on like this. You don't have to be really careful, except you want to stay inside the lines. That would be good. And so we're just going to put on this background mountain. And I did get a little more blue with these, so maybe I'll throw a little more blue onto this one. And this looks a little too dark now, so I can also add a little more white onto it. And remember, with the acrylics, you can blend right on top of the thing too. So you can blend colors on top of one another. So there, now I think that foreground mountain is a little closer to the other guys. And if I want to make them all exactly the same, maybe I'll just put a little more layer on these guys. So now we have all our mountains looking pretty much the same color. And I'm going to let this dry. And once this is dry, then we're going to come back with all the details, the fun part. So this is the kind of boring part. It's just the base coat for your mountains. And down here is going to be the hills. So we're going to leave that alone for a while. We're going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and put in the details. And you only need to let it dry for about 10 minutes. So not that long. So I will come right back and show you the next part. Okay, so our background is now dry. So now we can do the details in the mountains. So as you see, I put a little bit in here to start just to give you an idea what it's going to look like. I got some of the white there and a little bit of white on the background mountains, but a little lighter and not quite so detailed because that's the way background, so you really don't see a lot of detail there. So I'm going to do it on this one here and that one just to show you how it's going to be done. Let's see. Let's start out with some kind of chunks of white here. And then you can just sort of make little, you don't want it to be solid. We'll just kind of make little angles here and little strokes, because what that is the snow sitting on the rocks. So the snow is kind of sitting on the edges of the rocks, and you're going to see some dark areas behind it. So what we're going to do is we'll rinse off that. We'll go to the blue and the purple together, and we're going to do a little darker version, because what this is the shadow on the edges of the mountains here. We'll go in between these white specks also, because now we have some areas where we want some shadow along with the snow. So now you can see it really gives it some definition. So you've got some dark areas, some light areas. And what you can also do if you want to smooth it out just a little bit is you rinse off your brush, dry your brush off, and you go just dabbing along the edges here just to soften them up a bit. And then you take your rag, dry it off, do the same thing again, just sort of soften it up just a little bit. So now, just like this one, instead of having a lot of hard edges, you have a few soft edges as well. So it looks like the snow is just sort of sitting there. And on these dark areas, you can pull it a little bit in and it'll look like snow that has shadow on it. So now it's not all the bright white. It has a little bit of shadow as well. So you have your bright snow here and then a little bit darker snow on this side. And in the background, we're going to do just a light little bit of white there, because those mountains are going to be fairly light, so you really don't see a lot of detail in either the shadow or the highlights. So there I did it a little darker than I wanted to do. So I will wipe off my brush, just kind of soften it up a bit. So now we have our really light background mountains. We have our foreground mountains start to really come out with some nice details. So here on this one, I'm going to add a little bit more snow here. So that way you can see this snow is kind of some light is shining on it. So we're going to have some nice bright snow there. And now we can tackle the big mountain here. So we're going to do some big hunks of white. And you do not have to do it this fast. I'm just doing it fast just to kind of show you how it's done. Because I already know where I'm going to put this snow. So for me, it's just sort of filling in the details. But you want to take your time and figure out exactly where you want the snow, because you want it to look like it's snow on the top of the rocks and not just all over the rocks. But if you happen to put too much on, let me show you what you do. I say I just put like this and I go, oh no, I have way too much snow on there. So you can do it one of two ways. You can take your brush and pull some off with a little bit of moisture on the brush. As you can see, it's pulling off the paint. So now we'll just kind of pull some of the paint off. You can do it that way. And then you just reapply along the edges here. So now you can see it looks like the rocks with the snow on it again. And then we'll put a little bit of light here. And the other way to do it is to, when you get to the part where you're adding the shadows, you can just add a little more of the blue in there. And it's actually blue with a little bit of the crimson, like I told you before, to make like that purple. So we're just going to put some of that little purplish in here. And this side especially, because most of the darks are going to be on the left-hand side on this particular painting, because we have all the lightest parts are going to be on the right-hand side. All the darker parts are going to be a little more on the left-hand side. So here, you can see it sort of makes these kind of jagged, rough edges to the rocks, because these mountains are snow-capped mountains, and you don't want them to be too soft and fluffy. You want them to be hard edges. So you can just soften up the edges of the snow just a tiny bit. It just makes it look a little more painterly, so, which is actually a word, painterly. It means not so photorealistic. You want it to be a little more brush strokes showing and make it look a little more artistic. So now you can see how the detail is coming out. It looks so awesome now. And we're going to add some more of the white back here. And as you can see, I made it a little too detailed. So now I'm going to just take a little bit of softening with the brush and just go a little softer to make it sink into the background, because I don't want this mountain to look like it's in the foreground. So we'll just kind of fade it back there like that. This one, however, is going to be in the foreground, so we're going to add some more snow here and there. And we'll add some on the top of here, this little peak. But now you can see how it's really looking like some mountains in the foreground, because they're a little darker, and the ones in the background are a little bit lighter. They sink to the background. So now that we've got our mountain range done, we are going to let that dry a little bit. And the next lesson, number 3, is going to be the foreground with the trees and the grass. So we'll let this dry, and then I'll come back and show you that one in lesson 3. All right, so our mountains are dry now, so we're going to start these trees that are in the background, but they're still the foreground from the mountains. So I want to start out with putting a little bit of white over here, and that's going to make the trees look like they're in the background, because they're evergreen trees, but we don't want a really dark evergreen. So when you make a dark evergreen, what you do is use the dark green, brown, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. But I am going to add a little bit of white and a little bit of the yellow ochre as well. So now I have this lighter evergreen. So it makes them look like they are definitely in the background. And what I'm doing is just kind of poking up like this with my round brush. Just kind of poking like that. And I'm going to have a little row of trees that are coming down here. And I'll just kind of outline where those are going to be. And the rest of them are going to come across here. And if you notice, I'm not doing them all the same height, because trees don't grow at the same height. So you want to have them just kind of go up a little bit, down a little bit, and use the point of the brush to make the top of the tree. So you can push up, or you also pull down, and all that is going to be these background trees. So you're going to put all those nice little evergreens in the background there, and they are kind of in front of that mountain. And we'll add a little more, and we want this to kind of come downhill like this. And let's see, I'll fill in a few little extras here. And you could also make a little bit of a darker version of it to go near the bottom of the trees. We'll add maybe a little bit more dark blue, a little bitty bit of the brown, and don't want it too dark, just a little bit to kind of be a contrast to what we already have there, which is kind of a medium green, but the white kind of dulls it just a little bit to make it sink into the background. And so now we're going to put our field there. And the same thing, we want it to be slightly lighter because it's not evergreen. So we're going to mix a little bit of yellow ochre in there. So now we have a slightly lighter, maybe a little even more. There, we'll put a tiny speck of white in there. And so what we'll do is we'll keep moving here with the color until I get just what I want. And I'm going to go right up to the bottom edge of these evergreens. I might actually add a tiny speck of yellow in there too, because that is going to brighten it up just a tiny bit and separate it from the color of the trees. So now we have this field that's in the background, slightly lighter. And we're just going to kind of put that on there like this, put it in between the trees. So that's our background field. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow in there, a tiny bit of white. All right, so now we have this lighter field that's in the background, and you see it's rather dull because we're going to save the brighter greens for the foreground. And if you leave any white spaces, you want to make sure you fill those in. So we'll take that same darker evergreen color and kind of fill in here, because we don't want any white spaces. We want all that to be evergreens. So we're just going to put a few little evergreen trees together here. And that's going to just fill in the whole background here. And that's going to serve as a background for our front foliage, which is going to be a little brighter green. So we're going to, and make sure you don't do these all the same height. You want some lower, some higher. But this isn't a lot of detail because it's the background. And you don't want it to have a lot of detail because you want the foreground to stand out. So we're just going to kind of bring a few little here. And then we're going to make the foreground grass a little lighter. So I'm going to actually take some yellow in there and mix a little bit of brown, a little bit of the dark green, a little bit of blue. So now we have a lighter green. Oh no, we don't. Okay. Now we have a lighter green. And we'll even add a little more yellow. Okay, so now we have this lighter green so it stands out from the hillside that's behind it. And we'll put a little more yellow in there because we definitely want this to stand out. And we can actually cover right over that last little bunch of trees there. So this is going to be the foreground grass. And you see it's going to be a little more yellowish. So we can keep adding a little more yellow as we get to the foreground here. And even more yellow here. And let's see. I don't think I want both of these to go in the same direction, so maybe I'll pull this one down this way. And I'll use a slightly darker color behind it here to make this sit back a little bit. So all I did was add a little more of the green, which is the green with yellow ochre, because we don't want the cartoon green, which is straight from the bottle is more of a cartoon green, so we definitely don't want that. So we'll mix a little bit more of the yellowish here. And I'm doing this really fast, just like I did with the sky. And you can take your time doing this. And you can just pause the video until you finish each little part. But you see, now we have some variety here of the hillsides, because you don't necessarily want them all to be exactly the same. And now we're going to let this dry, and then we'll do the foreground trees. So you can see how we do the layers here. We started with the sky, the background of the sky, then the clouds, the background coating of the mountains, then the snow and the rocks and detail, and now we do the dark background trees and the lighter grass as we get forward. So the fun part now will be the trees, and we'll do that next. So we're going to let this dry now. All right, so now all of these greens are dry, and we're ready for our final stage, which is the foreground. So we're going to start with some brown. And I'm going to put it just on the tip of the brush, and we're going to drag the brush up to make our tree. So I think I'll start maybe right here. And trees are never perfectly straight, so we're just going to use the tip of the brush, and we're going to design our tree and maybe have it have a little branch over here. And one thing you can remember about trees to make it real easy is the letter Y. So if you notice, it already makes a nice letter Y, but it's not a perfectly straight stick kind of Y. It has a little variation to it. So we're going to get that a little bit darker. And what you want to do is pull up at the very end with the point of your brush, and it makes a tiny little branch at the very end, because trees never have big thick branches at the end. They always go to a real thin branch. So we'll start with that Y, and maybe I want to take the middle trunk of this tree just a little bit to the side. So the same thing, I'm going to drag it upwards. Now I'm going to start making all my little Ys. And you don't necessarily have to have them all go straight up either. Like for instance, we'll make this one go off to the side here. So there is a little Y going that way. And maybe this one is going to go almost straight up. But its little brother is going to go that way. Now we're going to take this one and go up here. We'll make another one there. And so you can decide where to put these little branches, or you can put them in the same place I do. But you don't want to be perfectly symmetrical, because trees never grow with perfectly symmetrical branches. They always have little crooks and different directions they go in. So you'll notice I'll just keep going here and making these little Ys. Whoops, I missed the spot. You can always come back. But you always want to drag it upwards and then just pull it up as you go toward the edge. So you just want to kind of like this and drag it and pull it up. And branches will a lot of times have these little crooks and bends in them, so you don't want to have all of your branches be perfectly straight. So you want them just to be little Ys like this. And as you get to the edge of the branches, they're going to have a lot of little Ys. So then you want to use just the tip of the brush. And I'm using a big brush just to show you it is possible to use a big brush to do this kind of thing, but it's a lot easier if you do use a little tiny brush. So you can also use a little tiny brush to do that. But I'm using the very tip of the brush. And if you don't have a brush with a perfect point, then you probably want to get a brush with a perfect point or get a tiny brush. So if you notice here, I'm just kind of dragging it up and tapering off. So you just kind of pull up as you get toward the end. And you'll notice that that's how you get these nice little tiny branches. And we're just going to do a few little more branches here that just kind of come up. And they're all just a Y. It just comes straight out from the branch that it's on. Now you have this nice little tree there. We might want to have this tree be a little fatter. So I think I'll start at the bottom and just kind of fatten them up just a little bit. And maybe the bottom of this branch can be a little bit fatter also. So now we have this very flat brown tree, but we want to have some variation in color and some highlights and shadows. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take my brown aside and add a tiny bit of the ultramarine blue, and that's going to darken my brown. And I can also add a tiny speck of the dark green as well. So now it's going to make a very dark version of this brown. So, and I'm going to pick a side, which if you see the light is coming from this side of the mountains, so I said, okay, that's going to be the light side of the tree. So we're going to put all of our shadows on the left side over here. So you're just going to kind of put little shadows on the left sides of these branches with that nice combination that we just made, which is the dark blue ultramarine, the brown, and the dark green. And we'll just put a little bit on the left side of these branches. Now you can see it's starting to get some shape here because now we have some dark shadow. But we still want to add a little more dimension, so we're going to add some highlights. So now I'm going to take my light yellow ochre, mix a tiny bit of brown with it, so now we have a lighter version of our brown. And I'm just going to come along on the right side of this tree and do a few little strokes like this. And you can see now we're really getting some shape to the tree because it looks like you have highlights on one side and shadows on the other side. So we'll do that on all our little branches here. And you can also, when you get near the top, you can add just a little more of the yellow ochre, make it slightly lighter. So now you have some nice little highlights on here. And that's what gives your tree the shape. You want highlights and shadows, because if you just have one color, it's going to look very flat. So we're going to add, now I'm going to put a little bit of white in here and with my yellow ochre. So I'll give one more step of lightness to it, just a little bit of highlights in there. And you don't want solid strokes, you want just little dabs here and there, because bark is never perfectly smooth, or very rarely perfectly smooth. So now we just want to do a few little highlights here and there. And now you can notice that it's really starting to get that nice shape of a tree. You could also do a little bit of blending, so you can go back to your dark brown and just do, oh, I put a lot of blue in there. Okay, I can cover that up with some brown. So what we can do is just do a little bit of blending. And if you find you overblend and you get rid of your nice highlights, then just put them back. So sometimes I'll do that deliberately just to kind of illustrate how that happens. So let's take some lighter color here and just go back over the parts that I covered. And we'll get some nice highlights back in there again. There, so now you can see the tree is starting to really look like a tree. You've got highlights on one side, shadows on the other side. And there's nothing better than contrast to really make something stand out. So if you think that your tree still looks a little flat, add some more of the darks. So we'll get some nice dark here. Add some more darks on this side. There we go. So now you can see the tree is starting to really look like a tree. And the bottom sort of right now looks like it's standing all by itself in midair. So what we want to do is grab some yellow, a little bit of our green, and a little yellow ochre. And what we'll end up with is a nice light, okay. We want a nice light green. So let's get some nice light green here. And we can kind of pull some strokes up like this. And I'm going to add a little more yellow. So I'll throw some more yellow out on my palette. All right, while you are doing that, grab some more yellow. Okay, now I have enough yellow. So I'm going to put some strokes of yellow in there. And see what I did? I just made some foreground grass. So now it looks like I have some tall grass around this tree, so you don't have to worry about the tree standing out in midair. And this is the same stroke you do for the branches, except you're doing it for grass. So you're just kind of coming up and doing this little, it starts here and just kind of flicks up. So now we have some grass there in the foreground. And this right here, you can do the same thing. Put a little bit of yellow and yellow-green. And always mix your green with some yellow ochre because you don't want it to be that cartoon green. So we'll just mix a few little strokes of, oh, I got a really heavy yellow there. Sometimes that happens, and you can mix a little bit of the green with it and get it back to where you want. Yeah, there's never any worry about making a mistake that's not correctable. Anything is correctable because you can either take it off with a paper towel that's slightly damp, or you can just paint right over it like I'm doing here. So now we have our little foreground grass. And I think I'm going to add a few more, maybe a bush on the other side. So I'm going to take my brown, and the same way we did the tree, I'm going to do some pulling up of these little branches, and this is going to be a bush rather than a tree. So for a bush, you want to do a whole lot of little short branches that are coming from a spot in the ground, because these are all the little branches on the inside of the bush. And then as you get toward the top, you want them to be a little bit thinner, because on the top of the bush, we're not going to show a lot of branch. Mainly it's going to be the foliage. So we just need a few little, like that. And the same thing we did with the shadows on the tree, we're going to do with the bush also. We're going to have a few little dark, which is dark ultramarine blue, and the brown and the dark green. So it just sort of adds a little extra of the dark. We don't need a lot of highlights because this is the underneath of the bush. So we're going to let this dry a little bit, and then we're going to come back and put the foliage in, because if we try and put the foliage on while the brown is still wet, it's going to make kind of a mushy brown, but we want a nice bright green. So we'll be right back. Okay, so the last part of lesson 3 is going to be the foliage on our tree and our bush. So I have mixed my green, which is the regular green with a little bit of yellow ochre, and I end up with this nice light, kind of a medium green. Then I take a little yellow to that and end up with a nice light yellow green, which still has that kind of foliage color when you mix the yellow ochre in with the green. And for our darker green, I have my dark green mixed with a little bit of brown. So that's going to be the really dark, dark green. So let's get started here. And what I'm going to do is just very lightly dab right over my little branches that I put here. And as you can see, you can kind of see the branches through, because what I did was I thinned out the paint just a little bit with some water. So it's not a really thick, heavy paint. So that way you can still see your branches through it. And even when I put on the dark green, you can kind of see the branches. And what I want to do is not fill in a whole big block of color. I want to put some dabs of color. So we're going to do little dabs of the dark green here. And there's some space in between it, so that way you can still see the sky in between. You don't want it to be like a solid block of color, because we want to actually leave some room for our medium green and our light green. So I'll just kind of dab, dab, dab around here with the dark green. And you can also dab a little in the middle here, because you don't want leaves only on the outside of your tree. You want them sort of all around. So these are like spring blossoms, so they're not going to be really heavy. So now we're going to go to our medium green, which was the regular green mixed with yellow ochre and a tiny bit of yellow. So let's just kind of mix that here. All right, that's good. It's a nice foliage green. And now I'm going to go sort of in between, but on top of a few. I don't want to totally cover up the dark, but I'm just going to kind of go a little bit around it and in between it, but I still want to see some white space. I don't want to totally cover up all of my nice dark green. So we'll do that. Just a few here and there. Now I go to the light green. So now I'll go to my really light green, which has added the yellow to it. So now we're going to go more on the outside, or in the right half of this a little bit more. But actually we're going to go all around it as well. So this is the light green, and that's going to go kind of in between here and there. And again, you don't have to do it as fast as I'm doing it, because I'm just doing this to show you, so we don't end up making a very long class. I want you to be able to paint. So I'm going to take some yellow mixed with it. So this is really lightening it up now. So it's almost yellow, but still it's more like a yellow-green. So we're going to dab this more toward the outsides and the pieces where the sky is. So if you have an area like this, you want to do it like the outside kind of it, because you want it to be where the sunlight is hitting it. So the sun is what's going to make these leaves more yellowish. So you can see I'm kind of mixing a little bit more yellow here. So let's just kind of dab a little more of the yellow around there. Make that kind of light. So now you can see you have a mix of the greens to make the foliage. Now, when you stand back and you look at it, you say, well, you know, maybe I don't want this tree to be totally perfectly round. So now I might take a little bit of foliage and kind of drag it out a little bit here and there. Maybe take some of the yellow too, drag it out here and there. That way you have a few little areas of the tree that aren't exactly a perfect circle or semicircle. So now we're just going to kind of come up here here and there. Maybe we'll drag a little bit of the green down here, and maybe some down here as well. And then I'll take my yellow and go around the edge of it. So now you can see we have a tree that has a little bit more random shape, and it's not all a perfect semicircle. And now you can start adding a few more bits of yellow here and there. If it looks like it's way too green, then you add a few more dabs of yellow here and there just to give it some character. So now I think I like that. So now I can go to my bush over here. And I think I might not have quite enough yellow, but maybe I will. So let me go to my darker green here. Now the bottom of the bush is going to be a little more dark green. So that is going to be where you don't really see any sunshine. So we're going to do dabs of the dark green around the bottom of the bush. And then that middle green is going to kind of come into that, but a little above it. And there, the very lightest green is going to go near the top. So we'll just kind of put this lighter green near the top. And I might need a little more yellow. But let's see here. Oh yes, definitely need a little more yellow. So, let me find my yellow. Okay. Put some yellow on my palette here. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so now I have more of this yellow so I can go around the top of the bush. Now you can actually see it, and it kind of sets it apart from that background green that we see. And if it looks like it's a little bit too yellow, I can add some more of the darker green. Add a few dabs of that darker green in here. And I'm actually going to put a little bit of blue in there too, because the ultramarine blue gives it just that little more dimension of contrast. So you have the light green and the dark green with the blue in it, and it just makes it a little more exciting than just the plain. So now I can drag a little bit of my medium green in here. And maybe a little more. I can actually mix a tiny bit of white with the yellow, and it'll make it just a little brighter too. So say we want to have this bush be a little brighter. And actually you can do the same thing with the tree. If you go back and look at the tree and say, you know what, maybe I want some really light yellows over here along the edges, then I'm going to mix a little bit of white and yellow. And now see how that kind of just really makes those areas pop? So we can do that as well on the little tree here. All right, so now we have our foreground foliage. And if you want to put a little extra grass that's very light, we can do the same thing. Put some little yellowish grass, and you'll see it kind of mixed already with the green. I mixed a little bit of green in there, so it's not quite a bright yellow. And we'll do it on the edge of this little grassy part here with the same thing. I'll take a little bit of this nice bright yellowish green with a tiny speck of white in it. And we put a few little here and there, little bunches of grass. And underneath this tree, we're going to put, or this bush rather, we'll put some dark green, maybe a little bit of medium green. And then we'll go back and get some yellow and put a little bit of yellow there too. So we'll get some variation in the grass, so it's not all exactly the same. So there is the simplest version of a landscape. And you can just take this as kind of a model, and you can do your own. You can put the mountains maybe a little more blue. You can also put them farther back. You can have more foreground. You can put a couple of trees. But this gives you the real basics of how to do each thing. So we've got the sky, the clouds, the mountains in the foreground, mountains in the background foliage, foreground foliage, your tree, your bush. And you can also add some flowers in there. So that is the end of lesson 3, and I will do another lesson for you guys, and we'll see what subject I come up with next. But I hope you get to enjoy this. Thank you.